Montana Territory, 1881. The wind was cruel that morning, cold enough to bite through wool and bone as Eliza Vance held her youngest child against her chest and pushed open the door to the mercantile in Dry Creek. She had not eaten since yesterday. Neither had her children. Her boots were soaked through, her dress threadbare at the sleeves, and her heart clenched as her eldest, 6-year-old Zadie, coughed behind her. The girl was too quiet, too still. Eliza knew that silence. It was the kind that came when a child grew too weak to cry. The shopkeeper looked up as the bell above the door rang. "Eliza," he said, voice soft with pity. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Her hands trembled. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a simple gold wedding band, dulled by time, but still warm with memory. "I need flour. Salt pork if you have it," she said, her voice steady but hollow. "And something for the baby's cough." The shopkeeper stared at the ring. "That your wedding band?" Eliza nodded, jaw tight. He hesitated, then took the ring. He gave her a sack of flour, a small slab of meat, and a bottle of cough tonic. No change. No words. She walked out holding the supplies in one hand, her baby boy in the other, and Zadie trailing behind like a shadow. Outside, the snow had started again. That same afternoon, a trail-worn horse trotted into Dry Creek, its rider tall in the saddle, dust on his coat, and a rifle slung across his back. Yates Booker had been gone from Montana for 2 years. Long enough for most folks to forget him, but not long enough for him to forget her. He tied his horse at the post, stepped inside the mercantile, and tipped his hat to the shopkeeper. "I heard Eliza Vance lives out this way now," Yates said, his voice rough from the road. "She here?" The shopkeeper blinked. "Just left. Sold her wedding ring to feed her kids." Yates froze. "She sold her ring?" "Had to. She's got 2 young ones. No husband now. Died in the mines last winter." Yates's jaw tightened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a few coins. "I want to buy that ring." The man hesitated. "It's not for sale." "It is now," Yates said, laying down twice what the man paid her. "And you will not tell her I bought it." The shopkeeper gave a short nod and handed over the ring. The gold was warm in Yates's palm, and he closed his fingers around it like it meant something more than gold ever could. He stepped back into the snow and stared out toward the foothills, where he knew the Vance homestead sat, a crumbling cabin at the edge of the pines. He mounted his horse and turned toward it. Eliza was chopping kindling behind the cabin when she heard the horse. She stood fast, the axe still in her hands, ready to defend her children if need be. But then she saw him. Yates Booker. He had been her husband's friend once. Before the war. Before everything. She had not seen him in years. "Yates," she said, squinting into the flurries. He dismounted slowly. "Eliza, what are you doing here?" He reached into his coat and pulled something from the inner pocket. Her breath caught as he stepped forward and held out her wedding ring. "I believe this belongs to you." She stared at it, eyes wide. Her hands stayed at her sides. "I did not ask you to. You did not have to," he said. "I saw what it cost you." A long silence stretched between them. The snow kept falling. Somewhere inside the cabin, the baby cried. "I cannot take that back," she whispered. "It was the last thing I had to give." "Then let it be the first thing that comes back to you," he said, and gently, he set the ring on the porch rail. Zadie appeared at the cabin door, her face pale, her eyes rimmed in red. Eliza turned to her daughter, then looked back at Yates. "You should come inside. It is too cold to talk out here." He nodded. Inside, the warmth was thin, but it was warmer than the road. He sat at the edge of the table while Eliza stirred the small pot of stew she had started with the meat. Zadie leaned against his arm, quiet but curious. The baby, Zev, was curled beside the hearth. "You came a long way," Eliza said, not looking at him. I was in Idaho, Yates replied. Heard a man mention Dry Creek. Your name came up. She turned, arms folded. Why did you come? He met her eyes. I do not know yet. Maybe to see if you were still you. I am not, she said simply. He looked around the cabin, the patched roof, the empty shelves, the cold creeping at the edges. No. But you're still standing. Her throat tightened. She turned back to the stew. They ate in silence. Afterward, he helped Zadie pull her blanket tighter and stoke the fire while Eliza rocked the baby. When night came, she laid a pallet near the fire. You can sleep here tonight. I do not have much, but it is warm. Yates nodded once. Thank you. She knelt by the fire, her eyes heavy. Do not think this means anything. I would never, he said. But he watched her long after she fell asleep, her face soft in the firelight, her hand resting protectively over her son's chest. He had not come back looking for love. But now that he had seen her again, he was not sure he could walk away. By morning, the fire had burned low and a pale light seeped through the frost-rimmed windows. Eliza eased from beneath the quilt and stood, careful not to wake the children. Her bones ached from the cold. Her palms were raw from the axe handle. But there was wood to split, and the fence had a lean to it she hadn't trusted since last week's wind. She didn't glance toward the pallet by the hearth until she heard him shift. Yates sat up slowly, rubbing his neck. You need help with the fence. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to him. I've managed it this long. He pulled on his coat. I know. Doesn't mean you have to keep shouldering all of it alone. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. Instead, she handed him the second axe from the wall peg. By midday, the wind had calmed, and the sun hung weak but present. They worked in silence, the rhythm of splitting and stacking steadier with two hands. Yates hadn't asked questions, hadn't spoken her husband's name, and for that, she was grateful. When Eliza stepped back to survey the repaired fence line, she noticed the way he stood with his weight off his left leg. A slight favoring, like the joint had never healed right. You were wounded, she said. He didn't look at her. Shrapnel. Shenandoah Valley. I walk fine when it's dry. You limp. I limp less than most. She nodded once, then turned back toward the cabin. There's coffee if you don't mind it then. Inside, Zadie was braiding a strip of cloth into her doll's hair. The baby was asleep in the cradle Eliza's husband had carved their first winter here, its legs now propped with stacked stones to keep it level. Yates hung his coat and sat at the table, his face quiet. Eliza poured coffee into 2 enamel cups and sat across from him. You stayed gone a long time, she finally said. I had nothing worth coming back for. She watched his fingers wrap around the cup. And now? I'm not sure yet. But I knew if I didn't come see for myself, I'd never stop wondering. She didn't look away. You and Caleb were close. We were boys together. Rode fence line before we knew what war really was. I remember. He studied her face, the lines carved deeper now, the curve of her mouth no longer quick to smile. He wrote me once. Said he was building you a porch. He never finished it. I could. Her hand tightened around her cup. We don't take handouts. I'm not offering one. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, cloud cover had thickened. Snow would fall again before dusk. The baby's name is Zev, she said. Short for Zebediah. Caleb picked it. Yates nodded. He has your eyes. She turned then, arms crossed against her chest. You passing through? Or you planning to stay long enough to finish something? I don't make promises I can't keep. I'm not asking for a promise. Just the truth. He rose slowly, the chair legs scraping the floor. I want to help. Not just today. Not just because things are hard. I want to help because I remember who you were before all this, and I see who you are now. And there's not a soul in this valley who could have held together what you have. She said nothing. And maybe, he added, I came back hoping there's room in your life for something that doesn't take more than it gives. There was a long silence before she walked past him and opened the door. You can stay in the lean-to if you don't mind the draft. I'll need help moving the goats downhill before the next storm. He followed her outside, the cold biting again, but softer now with movement. They walked side by side toward the slope where the goats huddled under the pine. He didn't reach for her hand, and she didn't offer it. But they moved together, feet leaving paired tracks in the snow, two sets, close and steady, leading toward the work ahead. The next rain came instead of snow, soft and steady, soaking the earth until the creek beside the pasture swelled and the goats huddled close to the cabin's windbreak. Eliza stood beneath the overhang, sleeves rolled, watching the water slide down the eaves while Yates hauled stones from the lower slope, stacking them to keep the runoff from washing out the root cellar. He worked without speaking, shirt damp with rain. She noted how he balanced each stone with deliberate care, not wasting motion. Zadie sat inside, stitching buttons onto a worn petticoat for her doll, while Zev napped on the cot with a wool blanket pulled to his chin. The quiet of the cabin had shifted since Yates arrived, not louder, but less heavy. You ever build anything before? Eliza asked, keeping her voice level. Yates looked up once. Fence lines mostly. One bunkhouse. Nothing that lasted. Why not? Didn't stay long enough in one place. She stepped down, boots squelching in the mud. What kept you moving? He set the last stone, then wiped his hands on his thighs. I kept waiting for something to feel like mine. Eliza picked up a fallen branch and tossed it onto the woodpile. And now? I'm still waiting, he said, tone quiet, but I think I'm closer. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled her shawl tighter and walked to the barn. The door groaned on its hinges as she stepped inside. He followed without being asked. Inside, the air held the scent of straw and old cedar. Two hens scratched near the wall, and an old plow leaned against the far beam. Eliza placed a hand on the yoke. This was Caleb's. He swore he'd fix it come spring. Never did. Still could, Yates offered. With some oil and time. She nodded once, fingers lingering on the worn wood. I haven't planted since he died. Just wild onions and berries when I find them. If you till the east patch, you could get potatoes in before frost sets in. That'd take more seed than I've got. I have coin, he said. Not much, but enough for seed and a second goat if we're careful. He met her gaze. If you'll have me here longer than a storm. Eliza leaned back against the beam. You'd stay just like that? No ranch of your own. No family hollering for you. He shook his head. My folks are gone. My brother's in Wyoming, and we haven't spoken in years. There's no one waiting on me but me. The hens clucked softly. Rain ticked against the roof. I don't have much, she said. Just land a government forgot, and a roof that leaks come spring thaw. I'm not looking for much, he replied. Just a place where I can set my hands to work and not feel like I'm passing through. She studied him, then not just the shape of him, but the way he held still when she spoke, like her words were worth standing in the rain for. Nothing in his face asked for pity or praise. Just a steady quiet, like the ground beneath frost. You can stay, she said at last. We'll trade work for room and see what comes. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. He simply nodded, slow and sure, like something had clicked into place. That night, he slept in the lean-to again, though she left a thicker blanket folded by the door. In the morning, she found him already hauling timber from the copse behind the barn, measuring lengths without needing to ask her preference. By week's end, the porch had taken shape. It was rough planks, uneven, rails still needing smoothing, but it held weight, and when she stepped onto it at dusk, Zev in one arm and Zadie clinging to her skirt, She felt something she hadn't in a long while. Rooted. Yates stood beside the beam he'd just fastened, sawdust in his hair. You think he'd have liked it? Eliza nodded. He would have told you the whole thing needed varnish. Then offered you whiskey. Yates leaned on the post. And you? I think it's the first thing built here that wasn't born out of grief. They stood without words then, watching the sky darken, the wind low and steady. Zadie reached for Yates's hand, and he took it without hesitation. Eliza didn't pull away. Later, when the lantern burned low and the children slept, she sat beside the hearth, mending a tear in her apron. Yates sat across from her, carving a sliver of wood into the start of a spoon. You planning to leave come spring? She asked, eyes on her stitching. Not unless you send me. She didn't look up. I might not. His voice was steady. Then I'll stay. And in the quiet that followed, the fire crackled, the wind hummed through the chinks, and the ring he'd returned sat on the shelf above them, waiting. The potatoes arrived in burlap sacks, slung over the back of a borrowed mule Yates had coaxed from the blacksmith in exchange for 3 days' labor. He brought them in just after sunrise, the sky pale and still, the frost brittle on the porch rail. Eliza stood at the edge of the garden plot, a spade already in her hands, the sleeves of her dress tied up past her elbows. She didn't ask where he got them. She only nodded once and said, We'll start near the creek bend. Soil's softer there. They worked without pause, the hush between them full of purpose. The baby slept in the sling on Eliza's back, and Zadie sat near the treeline, sorting stones from the loosened dirt. By noon, Yates had stripped to his undershirt, his arms streaked with soil, and the rows behind them had begun to take shape. You ever plant anything before? She asked, brushing her fingers clean on a stripped rag. Once, he said, straightening his back. A peach tree. My mother picked the spot. I dug the hole. Didn't last more than a year. Eliza glanced sideways. Why not? Too much wind. Not enough water. Sometimes even the best ground can't save a thing. She crouched to press a small potato into the earth. Sometimes what grows has to fight harder. That night, the baby fussed long past dusk. Eliza paced near the hearth with him pressed close, humming low beneath her breath. Yates stepped into the doorway with an oil lamp and waited until she looked up. I can take him, he said. She didn't answer at first. Then, with a sigh, she eased Zev into his arms. The boy quieted almost immediately, his hands curled into the front of Yates's shirt. Eliza sat, loosening the braid from her hair. He's not usually easy with strangers. I'm not one anymore, Yates said, eyes still on the sleeping child. She watched him a long moment, then asked, What did you think you'd find when you came back? He rocked gently, keeping his voice low. I didn't think that far ahead. I just knew I couldn't forget you. She blinked once, but her voice stayed even. You never said a word. After the war, after Caleb died. I thought you'd hate me for living when he didn't. I never hated you. I just stopped looking for anyone who might stay. Zadie stirred on the cot, turning toward the wall. The fire hissed as it settled deeper into coals. I was 20 when I married, Eliza said, pulling the blanket over her knees. Didn't know what silence meant yet. Thought love was loud. Laughing, dancing, talking late. And now I think it's quieter. It's someone chopping wood before you ask. Someone who knows how to hold a crying child without flinching. Yates met her gaze across the flickering light. I can't be what he was to you. I wouldn't ask you to be. He stepped closer, still holding Zev. Then tell me what you need. Eliza rose slowly. Her hand moved to Zev's back, fingers brushing Yates's as she took the baby. I need someone who won't leave when the trail gets hard. I don't scare easy. She nodded once and stepped back. Then stay. The next morning, she found him outside before dawn, laying cedar slats across the porch roof. She didn't speak. just picked up the hammer and joined him. And when their hands brushed, neither one pulled away. The sun held longer now, stretching across the ridge line like it meant to stay. Crocus buds had begun to break through the thawed ground near the barn, and the goats were grazing farther from the cabin each day, their hooves leaving lighter prints in the softening earth. Eliza leaned over the garden rows, tugging weeds from between the new shoots. The ache in her back had settled into something familiar, more reminder than pain. From the corner of her eye, she saw Yates stepping down from the pasture path, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder, his gait slower after walking the ridge. He crouched beside her, brushing dirt from his palm. Found a downed pine, just west of the creek. Could cut it for firewood. She pulled another weed. If it's dry enough. He nodded, then glanced at the garden. They're coming up strong. They'll need more water if the rain holds off. We can dig a trench from the spring. I've seen it done. She didn't answer right away. Then she sat back on her heels, brushing her hands on her apron. You always say we now. He looked at her then, steady but quiet. I noticed, she said. I don't know how to be here any other way. She studied the lines beside his mouth, the way the wind had deepened the color in his skin. I'm not used to someone planning things with me. I've had enough years planning alone. Eliza stood and brushed off her skirt. Zadie's voice echoed from the cabin, calling out a rhyme as she played, her words carrying through the clear air. Eliza tipped her head toward the sound. She's taken to you. I've taken to her. She turned to face him fully. You could stay if you meant to. I meant to the day I came through that door. Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. You'd be taking on more than this land. It's the children. It's memory. It's a house that still leans wrong when the wind changes. I'm not after ease. She stepped closer, quiet, until the hem of her skirt brushed his boot. Then you'll need to ask me proper. If you mean to stay. His voice lowered. Eliza Vance, would you have me build a life here with you? She reached out and took his wrist, the dirt still clinging to his skin. Yes. I would. They married in the small church at the edge of Dry Creek, where the pews creaked and the roof leaked near the back. Reverend Cole read from a worn Bible, and Zadie carried a wildflower bouquet she'd picked from the hillside. There was no music, no guests but the children and the Reverend's wife, who held Zev while Eliza and Yates stood hand in hand. Eliza wore a dress she'd let out at the seams, the sleeves re-stitched with new thread. Yates wore the same coat he'd arrived in, brushed clean and pressed at the collar. When the service ended, they stepped outside into the spring light. The breeze was soft, and Eliza's hair lifted along her cheek as Yates leaned close and pressed his forehead to hers. I'll build that porch again, he murmured. You already did. Years passed, slow and full. They added a second room onto the cabin the following summer, then a lean-to for tools and seed. The potato rows tripled, and Eliza taught Zadie how to preserve jars for winter. Zev learned to walk along the porch rail and later to ride, clinging to Yates's arm with a grin too wide for his small face. There was never much money, but there was always food, always warmth. When the goats grew old, they traded for hens. When the well dipped low, Yates dug deeper. Eliza stitched new curtains the year Zadie turned 10. That same season, Yates carved a cradle by hand and set it beside the hearth before the snow came. Eliza stood over it with her hands on her belly, quiet and sure. They never spoke of the war again, or of the years between. There was no need. Everything they carried, they shared now, in the rhythm of the days, in the way they moved through work and rest, grief and laughter. At night, when the children slept and the wind circled outside, Eliza would rest her head against his chest and feel the steady beat there, solid and near. I never thought I'd find peace in this place, she once whispered. He kissed the top of her head. You didn't. You built it. And she had. They both had. Together.